Hi everyone. So today we are going to work on three chapters 23, 24, and 25. We'll be able to finish this book by Thursday, so it's super exciting. But last we left off on, Edward had fallen in a dancing accident with Bryce, and he spun into this terrible dream and became unconscious, which means that he basically fell asleep for the moment. Everything turned black, and he can't really know where he is at the moment. So we'll see where he is when he wakes up, and we'll read these three chapters together. Chapter 23. Exceedingly well made, said the man who was running a warm cloth over Edward's face. A work of art, I would say. A surpassingly unbelievable dirty work of art, but art nonetheless. And dirty can be dealt with, just as your broken head has been dealt with. Edward looked into the eyes of the man. Ah, there you are, the man said. I can see you are listening now. Your head was broken. I fixed it. I brought you back from the world of the dead. My heart, thought Edward, my heart is broken. No need to thank me, the man said. It's my job, quite literally. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Lucius Clark, dollmender. Your head, may I tell you, will it upset you? Well, I always say the truth must be met head on, no pun intended. Your head, young sir, was in 21 pieces. 21 pieces, Edward repeated mindlessly. Lucius Clark nodded. 21, he said. All modesty aside, I must admit that a lesser a dollmender without my skills, might have not been able to rescue you. But let's not speak of what might have been. Let us speak of what is. You are whole. You have been pulled back from the brink of oblivion by your humble servant, Lucius Clark. And here, Lucius Clark put his hand on my chest and bowed deeply over Edward. This was quite a speech to wake up to, and Edward lay on his back trying to absorb it. He was on a wooden table. He was in a room with sunshine pouring in from the high windows. His head apparently had been in 21 pieces and now was put back together into one. He was not wearing a red suit. In fact, he had no clothes on at all. He was naked again, and he did not have wings. And then he remembered. Bryce, the diner. Neil swinging him through the air. Bryce! You are wondering, perhaps, about your young friend, said Lucius. The one with the continually runny nose. Yes, he brought you here, weeping, begging for my assistance. Put him together again, he said. Put him back together. I told him, I said, young sir, I'm a businessman. I can put your rabbit back together again, for a price. The question is, can you pay this price? He could not, of course. He could not. He said that he could not. I told him that he had two options, only two. The first option being that he seek assistance elsewhere. Option 2 was that I would fix to the very best of my considerable abilities, and then you would become mine. His no longer, but mine. Here Lucius fell silent. He nodded, agreeing with himself. Two options only, he said, and your friend chose option 2. He gave you up so that you could be healed. Extraordinary, really. Bryce, thought Edward. Lucius Clark clapped his hands together. But no worries, my friend, no worries. I intend to keep up my end of the bargain. I will restore you to what I perceive to be your former glory. You shall have rabbit fur ears and a rabbit fur tail. Your whiskers will be repaired and repainted to a bright and stunning blue. You will be clothed in the finest of suits. And then, some day, I will reap the return on my investment in you. All in good time, all in good time. In the doll business, we have a saying. There is real time and there is dull time. You, my fine friend, have entered dull time. Chapter 24. And so Edward Tulane was mended, put back together again, clean and polished, dressed in an elegant suit and placed on a higher shelf for display. From this shelf, Edward could see the whole shop. Lucius Clark's workbench and the windows from outside world and the door that the customers used to enter and leave. From this shelf, Edward saw Bryce open the door one day and stand in the threshold, the silver harmonica in his left hand flashing brilliantly and the sunlight flooding in through the windows. "Young sir," said Lucius, "I'm afraid that we have made a deal." "Can't I see him?" asked Bryce. He wiped his hands across his nose, and the gesture filled Edward with a terrible feeling of love and loss. "I just want to look at him." Lucius Clark sighed. "You may look," he said. "You may look, and then you must go and not come back. I cannot have you in my shop every day mooning over what you have lost." "Yes, sir," said Bryce. Lucius sighed again. He got up from his workbench and went to Edward's shelf and picked him up and held him so that Bryce could see him. "Hey, Jangles," said Bryce. "You look good. Last time I seen you, you looked terrible. Your head was busted in and—" "He is put back together again," said Lucius, "as I promised you he would be." Bryce nodded. He wiped his hand across his nose. "Can I hold him?" he asked. "No," said Lucius. Bryce nodded again. "Tell him goodbye," said Lucius Clark. "He is repaired. He has been saved. Now you must tell him goodbye." "Goodbye," said Bryce. "Don't go," thought Edward. "I won't be able to bear it if you go." "And now you must leave," said Lucius Clark. "Yes, sir," said Bryce. But he stood without moving, looking at Edward. "Go," said Lucius Clark. "Go." "Please," thought Edward, "don't." Bryce turned, and he walked through the door of the doll mender's shop. The door closed, the bell tinkled, and Edward was alone. Chapter 25. Technically, of course, he was not alone. Lucius Clark's shop was filled with dolls, lady dolls and baby dolls, dolls with eyes that opened and closed, and dolls with painted-on eyes, dolls dressed as queens, and dolls dressed wearing sailor suits. Edward had never cared for dolls. He found them annoying and self-centered, twittery and vain. This option was immediately reinforced by his first shelf-mate, a china doll with glass eyes and red lips and dark brown hair. She was wearing a green satin dress that fell to her knees. "What are you?" she said in a high-pitched voice that when Edward was placed on the shelf next to her. "I am a rabbit," said Edward. The doll let out a small squeak. "You're in the wrong place," she said. "This is a shop for dolls, not rabbits." Edward said nothing. "Shoo," said the doll. "I would love to shoo," said Edward, "but it's obvious that I cannot." After a long silence, the doll said, "I hope you don't think that anyone is going to buy you." Again, Edward said nothing. "The people who come in here want dolls, not rabbits. They want baby dolls or elegant dolls, such as myself. Dolls with pretty dresses, dolls with eyes that open and close. I have no interest in being purchased," said Edward. The doll gasped. "You don't want someone to buy you," she said. "You don't want to be owned by a little girl who loves you?" "Sarah Ruth, Abilene." Their names went through Edward's head like notes of a sad, sweet song. "I have already been loved," said Edward. "I have been loved by a girl named Abilene. I have been loved by a fisherman and his wife, and a hobo and his dog. I have been loved by a boy who played the harmonica, and by a girl who died. Don't talk to me about love," he said. "I have known love." This impassioned speech shut up Edward's shelf-mate for a considerable amount of time. "Well," she said at last, "still, my point is that no one is going to buy you." They did not speak to each other again. The doll was sold 2 weeks later to a grandmother who was purchasing her for her grandchild. "Yes," she said to Lucius Clark, "that one right there with the green dress. She is quite lovely." "Yes," said Lucius. "She is, isn't she?" And he plucked the doll from the shelf. "Goodbye and good riddance," thought Edward. The spot next to the rabbit stayed vacant for a long time. Day after day, the door to the shop opened and closed, letting in early morning sun or late afternoon light, lifting the hearts of the dolls inside, all of them thinking when the door swung wide that this time, the person entering the shop would be the one who wanted them. Edward was the lone contrarian. He prided himself on not hoping, on not allowing his heart to lift him inside of him. He prided himself on keeping his heart silent, immobile, closed tight. I am done with hope, thought Edward Tulane. And then one day, at dusk, right before he closed the shop, Lucius Clark placed another doll on the shelf next to Edward. Ooh! Guess we'll find out who this doll is in the next reading tomorrow, but I hope you enjoy answering the questions and listening to chapters 23, 24, and 25 of The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Your questions and reading are on Google Classroom if you want to go over them. And if you want to go over the reading, but the questions are below the reading on Google Classroom. So have a good time answering those questions, and I look forward to reading all of your answers. Bye-bye, 4th grade.